He is a PhD from Oxford University in UK, and his PhD thesis was Christian and Islamic theology.
So namaste everybody. First and foremost, thank you to everybody who helped organize this. Thank you to Ramesh ji for allowing this to happen, and thank you to all of you to take out your evenings and come to this event. If nothing else, at least the food was great. After that, I cannot promise what the rest of the evening might be like. It's a delight to be here. I've been on a tour of the US, West Coast, and Texas over the last 2 weeks. I must have traveled over 12 different cities, 2 events a day. And you Americans really squeeze it out of us, So this is my last event. Tomorrow I fly back to the UK. And I have tried to bring this book to as a diverse audience as possible. So speaking at Stanford, Berkeley, San Jose, UC Davis, Carnegie Mellon, and so on and so forth. And finally, here I am on my home turf. So this is the home turf, right? So I thought, what should I share with you? So I want to share some opening remarks for 10, 15 minutes, and then we can just open it up. And I don't really want to share with you what's in the book. I would rather you buy the book, read the book. I would rather you download the audiobook, which is read by somebody with a much more nicer voice than mine, a lady called Divya Sharda, who's read the book. So you can download it if you're not a reader. So I'd rather you do that. And I'd rather you explore the life, the character, and the times of Keshav Hedgewar yourselves. So what I want to do is I want to share you a little bit about how on earth, A, did someone like me end up writing a book like this? And number 2, how did I go about doing the research? How did we bring this book together? And then hopefully by then I've convinced you all to buy the book and read the book. So that's the aim. And by the way, they may not have told you when they invited you, but you're not allowed to leave until you buy a book. So let me begin with a little bit of where this all started. And Ramesh, you rightly said that I spent almost 2.5 years studying Christianity and Islam at the Divinity College in Oxford, at Merton College. And that, in some ways, gave me a grounding to understand global trends. Obviously, being rooted within Hindu society, growing up in the UK, connected to various community events, like many of your children would be. I went to India for the first time when I was 22 years old, backpacking. And let me confess to you that I cannot really, मेरी हिंदी ठीक है, मैं इतना बोल सकता हूँ, but I can't read and write. I can't read and write Marathi. I can't read and write Bengali. All the languages you might need to study Keshav Hedgewar. So how on earth did I end up doing this? So essentially, I have a premise, and I still live by this premise. My premise is that it's increasingly obvious to me that the world needs to understand India. And it's important for India to understand the world and its place in the world. And my contention is, growing up in the UK and in the years that I did, that I can tell you, nobody in the West really understands India. No matter how much Indians in India think they've arrived on the world stage, they haven't. India is still not on the table. India is in the room, it's not on the table. And I firmly felt that from a policy level, why is that the case? And with a certain career that I've had, a certain experience that I've had, I realized that it's because there is a deep lack of understanding. And that lack of understanding starts with people like me. And I am British, and I'm very, very British in some ways, which you'd obviously expect. I am Indian, ethnically, obviously. My roots come from that land, and I am Hindu. So I traverse a tripart identity, like many of my generation do. So it starts with us, but we have to understand India. So hence I started traveling to India, I started exploring India. And it dawned on me very young, but it got increasingly more so that if you want to understand modern India, my contention is that you cannot understand modern India unless you understand the RSS. Now, I don't really care if you like the RSS, don't like the RSS. That's not my argument. My argument, though, is that the force that is shaping modern India more than any other is the movement that Keshav Hedgewar started. And therefore, my logical conclusion is, if I want to understand the RSS, you have to start at the beginning. What were the forces that incubated this movement in 1925? Who was the person who founded it? Why did he find it? Who influenced him? What were the forces shaping his life? Because unless and until you understand the origins of a movement, you can never truly understand the movement. And of course, you see, this is my whole premise. That only if I understand Keshav Hedgewar could I understand the RSS, and only if I understand the RSS can I actually understand the forces that are shaping modern India. Throughout this, I've not said whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's not my concern. That's for each of you to decide yourselves. I always say this to all the audiences. You decide, but at least you should know the truth. At least you should know fact from fiction, right? And at least we should be able to grapple with the complexities of a country with 1.4 billion people and the diversity of India, right? We should be able to do that if we are serious. So I started asking questions. Growing up. I started reading Western Academy, the Indian Academy, and for sake of time, I will just flatten the conversation. In the Indian Western Academy, Keshav Hedgewar is a Hindu bigot, fascist, orthodox, backwards, regressive. Broadly put, they're the framing. So, okay, I could read those things, and I did extensively. I challenged the academics that were writing these things, and it dawned on me that not a single one of them, can you believe, up to this point, has had any access to primary data of Keshav Hedgewar. When I say primary data, I mean, have you read his letters? Have you read his speeches? Have you read his notes? Have you been to the places where he grew up? And the answer I got from the Western Academy and the Indian Academy was no. And their argument was, but Sachin, how can we, when all of this stuff is hidden in libraries, deep in archives, or it's with the RSS, and the RSS will not share their archives with any of us. Okay, so I started writing letters to the RSS. I said, look, and of course I read all the RSS literature in English of Keshav Hedgewar. And let me be honest to you, for someone like me, and many, many others, I'm not in the minority here, the literature of the RSS is simply not good enough. It also flattens his personality. He is the savior of Hindus. He is a patriot. He is a nationalist. He is so committed to his people. He's almost semi-divine, if not divine. So you get extremes on both sides. And both are unhelpful in really understanding the nuances of what we are trying to explore, or what I was trying to explore. Because that literature of the RSS was written in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And those were written for internal consumptions, amongst the organization, for the organization. It was never written for academics. It was never written for journalists. It was never written for scholars. So that wasn't going to cut it. So I complained. I said, how can there be no literature about the founder of an organization where I can go to the depths, the tribal villages in Arunachal Pradesh, and I will find RSS Swayamsevaks working in those jungles, and then I can go to a swanky bar in South Mumbai talking about international trade, and the lawyer next to me will be a RSS guy. I can go to an Indian Chamber of Commerce in any city, and I'll find somebody from the RSS. They control 30,000 high schools in the country, hundreds of hospitals. The largest labor unions in India are RSS. How can an organization of this scale, this magnitude, not have any decent literature about its founder? And how come no academic has really pushed for authentic material? And here you should be careful, and you should remember these words. If you complain too much, the Sangh will usually say, well, why don't you write it? And that's what happened. And initially I kind of batted that away, right? Like, that's just not, I mean, A, I'm a philosopher. I am not a historian. B, I confess I can't read or write any of the Indian languages. And C, I live in London. How am I possibly going to do this? Again, the Sangh answer is really interesting. And now, when you read the book, you'll know why the answers come out like this. They said, what's the rush? Take your time. It might take 10 years. Well, but then I said, hold on. I don't have access to any of the archives. And I won't write without the archives. They said, you can have the keys. We'll give you our archives. Have a go. Now what do I say? And I thought to myself, and then actually it was a friend of mine who ironically studies at UCLA, who did his PhD in Islamic studies, and now he's a lecturer here at UCLA. He said to me, he goes, Sachin, are you kidding me? You're getting access to archives that academics would give their right hand for. You're really going to turn this away? And I was in the middle of a busy private equity career, right? Like, I was in the midst of a private equity career. And he convinced me to say yes. And many, and I have to say, Sangh Pracharaks, these are people who devote their full time, they give their entire lives to the Sangh and the mission of Keshav Hedgewar. Two of them came to see me and said, look, we will not supervise your writing. You can write. And I said, look, I have to write it as I see it. What I cannot do is engineer it for anything. And they said, we will never ask you for anything, for us to see what you have written. You just write. That touched me. That's the moment where I tripped and I thought, no, I got to do this. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and it's come to my doorstep. I should not turn it away. And so I engaged, not knowing what I would find. This is in 2017. It took 7 years to write this book, to research and write. It took 4.5 years of research. It took another 2.5 years to write. And so that's how I ended up really exploring the depths. And I mean, I would take holidays, I would take breaks. For 7 years, if I took a break from my work, it was to write or to research. I had a team of scholars, wonderful scholars, in Marathi, Bengali, Hindi, so who helped transliterate the texts. And we created a research methodology. The other confession I should make now is that this book, even after 4.5 years of research, is only really off the back of 50% of all the literature that is available. So who knows what else there is to discover? So everything you read is still off the back of only 50%. There is still a lot more that maybe somebody in this room one day can go and spend another 7 years on and do a better job. So this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. This is not the conclusive sort of story. It is the beginning. It is the definitive, Penguin named it definitive, not me, the definitive start to a conversation, right? So this is how it happened. Let me tell you very quickly about how the research happened so you can appreciate it. I try to bring Keshav Hedgewar alive. I want the reader to see the India that he would have seen. So I'm not trying to write about the India that I think. Throughout the book, and you'll sense it in my narrative, I'm trying to show the reader the India that he would have seen. Why? Because it is his. I'm a realist, I'm not an idealist. So for me, he's a human being, and just like all human beings, we are shaped by our upbringing, by the forces that influence us, by our education, by our parents, and so on and so forth, by the forces that affect. So I wanted the reader to go on that journey of his life. It is a biography, right? It is not a philosophical treatise, anything like. It is a biography. So I try and bring the India of 1889 to 1940 alive, right? So how do I do that? So let me tell you some stories about how I went about doing it. I got a map from the British Library. British Library is fantastic. If you're a researcher on colonial India, right? The British Library is incredible. Even all the dodgy things they did, they're all there, right? You just have to spend enough time going through it. So I got a map of Nagpur from 1902, which is where he was born. And I got my Google Maps out. This is in 2017. And I could see, I knew where Keshav Hedgewar's home is. That's now been refurbished and it's like a museum. And he went to a school, which we know which school he went to, because that's in the letters. That school is now a zoo, by the way, right? And so I overlaid the 1902 map on Google Maps, and so I could see which roads still existed from those days. I then called up the Forestry Commission in Nagpur, and I said, hey, look, these are the 5-6 streets that still exist from 1902. Can you give me a list of all the trees, the fauna, the things that would have existed on these streets from then? And they gave me a list. So I knew exactly which trees, which fauna, what buildings were around in 1902. And the great thing about India is as you walk down these streets with my map, and I could look for the old buildings, and there are many of them, I could just knock on them, and Indians being Indians would say, yeah, come in, I'll show you my house. Yeah, I'll just show you my building. And I got to walk around, I got to see what a building from 1902 may have looked like, right? So I walk and I show the reader what his world would have looked like. I did the same thing in Calcutta, did the same thing to all the places he went to, including where he studied. I'll give you another example. He spends 1 year in prison in 1921. Now, the RSS literature, the Western Academy, the Indian Academy tell you nothing about his time in prison. The RSS literature tells you, and I paraphrase, he goes to prison, he charms everybody in the prison, including the prison warden. He influences everyone. He has a great time in prison. He comes out of prison and he's even heavier than when he went in. Okay, I'm going to take that with a pinch of salt. So I thought, well, how do I find out what really happened? We know that he was getting letters from people and he was writing letters back, but he doesn't describe, he describes a few bits about what happened in prison, but not substantive. Then in the British Library, I find a video from 1915. It's a black and white video, no sound, but it's a black and white video made for British parliamentarians so that they could see how the British were treating Indians throughout the empire, obviously, right? And prison life and how we treat these criminals, you know. Now this video still is there in the British Library, and so I went through it. Now, 1915 is 6 years before he went to jail. It's the same prison in Nagpur. So in this video, they show you how they were treated, what they ate, what facilities they had, how they were punished, where they slept, what was their routine like, everything. And what's incredible is that by watching this video and reading his notes and seeing what happened to him after prison, you can see that it was, today you and I would call it abuse. It was abuse, what he would have gone through. Humiliation as well. And the funny thing is, Keshav Hedgewar tells us in his notes, he tells Munjay that he chooses, so there's two ways. You can be a political prisoner, which is what he was, or you can be a common prisoner. The political prisoners get their own room, they get a bed, they get some books, and you can write. But a common prisoner doesn't get any of that. The common prisoner gets treated pretty rough. He chooses to be a common prisoner to show solidarity with his other colleagues. So we know the kind of treatment he would have had for a year, and then it doesn't surprise me that 18 months after prison, he starts getting respiratory problems. And when you see the work that they made the prisoners do, you knew why he got respiratory problems. And he slowly falls ill, and he loses his health very quickly, and by 51 he dies. Prison fundamentally changes him. Not just the way he was treated, but then what was happening in India around that time, which you can read the book to find out. But my point is, this is how I bring prison life alive. And this is how we know. Second thing I found was in Ireland. In fact, in the British Library, but about Ireland. There was an Irish prison warden. He wrote a diary, as many of these people did when they came back from India. In that diary, there's like 3 paragraphs about a time when some guy called Hedgewar was in prison. So you got an idea of what he was like from the prison warden's perspective. It's a fascinating read. And I try and show you, and I try and bring it alive in this book. Right? And the third example I'll give you of the kind of research we did was that we had the archival material. We did the kind of walking the streets and digging these kind of truths up. The other thing is we studied hundreds of biographies of other people who were alive during his time. And we scoured page after page after page to find a paragraph, a sentence, a line that referenced him. Right? Now remember, a lot of these things are in Marathi, Hindi, Bengali. He wrote in English a lot, thankfully, so I could grasp that somewhat. So we had a bunch of scholars. I'm glad you found that funny. That was meant to be funny. American audiences, huh? So essentially went through lots and lots of translation. And that took a very, very long time because it's human nature that when somebody translates something, you can't help but put your own masala in it. So what I used to do was I used to not tell the scholars that I've got another set of scholars that are going to check your work. So we had to have double checks. And any slight discrepancy, back to the drawing board. Start again. Because you couldn't get these things wrong, right? You have to be rigorous. So this is how the research was done. This is how the book was compiled. And I will just end with this, and then we can do a bit of a Q&A, and you can open it up to all of you. Let me just tell you 3 things that I think is fascinating. I mean, he's a very, very complicated. What I try and do in this book is I make him, what the Western Academy and the Indian Academy have done is made him one-dimensional, right? I've tried to make him 4-dimensional again. I've tried to bring his personality back to life. I've tried to make him nuanced and complicated because human beings like this, who can start a social experiment in 1925, which reaches 100 years today, cannot be a simple man. He's a highly complicated man, right? And that complexity I try and bring out, right? So it's not a black and white book. It's full of nuance, but I promise you'll enjoy it, right? So buy it. So let me just share 3 quick observations that you might find, oh really? Like it's an oh really moment. Number 1, he gets orphaned at the age of 12. His parents die on the same day by the Black Plague. Right? Now, the Black Plague, for those of you who don't know, I describe vividly what it does. It is cruel, it is brutal. At the time when he was 12 years old, around 300 people a day in Nagpur were dying. And these plague outbursts would last 10 months. Just have a think about the devastation those kind of plagues would have done to a society. And these plagues came every 5-6 years. 300 a day for 10 months at a time. How many widows, how many spinsters, how many orphans were created? Indian society was being ravaged, right? This is a time, by the way, when only 10% of men could read and write in any language. Less than 1% of women could read and write in any language. This is a highly illiterate, superstitious, poor, backward society. And he's in the middle of it, ravaged by plagues and famines. India is in a bad shape, and I spend a lot of time describing where India ended up around this period. And I don't think enough of us appreciate what Indians, what our ancestors, our forebears would have gone through. It is quite striking. In that moment, he gets orphaned, and that's a tragedy. Just imagine what psychological effects would happen to a 12-year-old. Imagine the average 12-year-old you know, and what would happen if they were orphaned like this in one day. What would be the consequence of that, do you think? That's one. 3 months later, he gets adopted. He gets adopted by one of the wealthiest men in Maharashtra, a man called Dr. Munjay, who was an ex-British military medical officer, fought in the Boer Wars, then joined Tilak's freedom movement, and he bankrolled a lot of Tilak's freedom movement. And suddenly he goes from this poor, humble background kid who gets orphaned into being adopted by one of the wealthiest men in Maharashtra. And suddenly he has exposure to the who's who. Tilak comes to his house for chai. Aurobindo Ghosh regularly comes to see Munjay. Right? Now suddenly he's in the who's who of Indian society. And suddenly he's exposed to English. By 18, he has devoured, and here you go, he has devoured not just the Gita, Ramdas's Das Bodh or Mano Bodh, which are the Marathi, is beautiful Marathi literature, right? Many of you may be familiar with it. So he's memorized those things, that's fine, and that's given. The RSS literature tells you about that. What they don't tell you, what nobody tells you, is that he had by 18 absorbed Voltaire, Nietzsche, Aristotle, Marx, right? Mazzini, right? These are Enlightenment European philosophers of the highest order. And he'd already absorbed them. He was absorbing them relentlessly. We know this factually. How come nobody talks about this? That the Hedgewarian mind is a syncretic mind. He is not just rooted in a deep Hindu past. He is also inspired and influenced by Enlightenment European thinking. He is a syncretic mind, right? So it makes him complicated. It makes him interesting, right? One. Number two example I'll share with you. He's a medical student, right? He goes to medical college. You can wonder now why he went to medical college, knowing who he was adopted by. So he goes to medical college. His classmate happens to be Narayan Savarkar, who is a younger brother of Vinayak Savarkar, right? So Narayan Savarkar and Hedgewar are good friends. And there's a flood that happens in one of the villages nearby. And medical students are asked to come and help with the relief efforts. So these medical students go, all male, obviously, because women were still not encouraged to study anything. So they went, and they would go house to house on boats, because it was all flooded. Hedgewar writes, he writes, so they were allowed to administer medication to all the men. They were suffering from diarrhea, cholera, dehydration, right? And it was pretty bad. So they could administer medication to all the men. None of these doctors were allowed to administer any medication to women. And women died in their hundreds when they could have been saved. This scars him. This genuinely scars him. And he writes that until and unless the emancipation of women occurs in our country, there can be no country. Right? So these are striking examples that make him complicated, that make him interesting. Right? And the third example I'll share with you, which may be an aha moment, is what I think makes him extraordinary. What makes him extraordinary in terms of interest. Again, I am not really worried, and I say this in all my audiences. I don't care if you think the RSS is good or bad. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me if you like Narendra Modi or you don't like Narendra Modi. That's not my concern. My concern is you have to study the mind of Hedgewar. What I think makes Keshav Hedgewar so infinitely interesting is that I think, like a medical doctor, he examines the society in which he finds himself in, and he diagnoses the problem. And I think he diagnoses the problem with clarity that none of his contemporaries quite got right. And not only does he diagnose the problem, I think he tries to give a solution to that problem. And you know what the problem? And it's not that he sat under a tree one day and he meditated and voila, it just happened. Right? That's not how the real world works. He goes through a journey, struggle, internal struggle, physical struggle. And in the end, he comes out with this notion that actually the British and colonialism are a symptom of the problem. They are not the problem. The Mughals and Islamic imperialism is the symptom of the problem, not the problem. Poverty, illiteracy, superstition is a symptom of the problem, not the problem. So what is the problem? And what he says is that the problem with India are the Indians. And by Indians, he meant the Hindus, right? And what is wrong with Hindus? They are, what he says they are fragmented by caste, class, creed, and the disempowerment of women. The oppression of women by culture and custom. These are the 4 ailments he diagnoses. And until and unless the average Indian can trust another average Indian who is not his kin, until that what in modern speak we would call social capital. Social capital is simple. It's my ability to trust you. If I cannot trust you, we cannot cooperate. If we cannot cooperate, we cannot build communities. If I cannot build a community, I cannot build a nation. And he said the fundamental problem with Hindu society is Hindus cannot trust Hindus. Social capital had evaporated out of the society over hundreds of years. And therefore, caste, class, and creed, and the disempowerment of women was the problem with Indian society. And it had to be fixed. And so he realized that even if the British left, what kind of country would India become? And he writes in 1932, he writes that my fear is that our people, he uses the word we will balkanize India. 1932. So he could see where the society was heading. And the rest is history, as they say, because then he gives up politics, he gives up the revolution, he then focuses his last final 15 years of his life on his social experiment, and it was a social experiment, later called the RSS, and then the rest is history. So I will end there, and we can then take some Q&A.
So after getting all the insights from Sachin ji about what inspired him to write this book, we'll open it for a question. But before we do that, just a quick word. So RSS arguably is the most influential organization, not only in India but all over the world. And just this past Vijayadashmi, RSS completed its 100th year. And what could have been the better timing to really get to know about the man behind this RSS, the mind and the person who is. And we can get to know through this book, which Sachin ji has researched so well. So that is one thing. Second thing is, this particular event is organized by AHED, it's American Hindus for Engagement and Dialogue, in collaboration with HGH, Hindus of Greater Houston. We have Rachna ji Shah here today, HGH President. Vijay ji could not make it to the event due to personal reason. And it is supported by HSS Houston chapter and as well as Hindu Yuva.
First of all, why was he in prison? What had he done something to piss off the British? Second, we had a writer here back in April. His name is Dr. Ratan Sharda, and he wrote a book called RSS 360. Have you had a chance to read it?
I know Ratan ji well. Yes. So I know Ratan ji well, and I'll say read the book to know that answer.
So, yeah, if we can line up please here for a question so that...
Yeah. Just by the way, I should also tell you that I didn't plan it, or nobody had planned it, so that 7 years ago we had thought that it will take 7 years, and bang on 100 years we would launch the book. I have to kind of thank the genius of Penguin for that. But when we started writing this, we just started writing this. And I definitely didn't think it would take me 7 years. So sometimes the universe conspires, as they say.
What would Hedgewar think of the India that is today and how RSS has evolved? Would he be happy? Would he be sad? What would he think?
Gosh, that's a question that can get you run over, right? That's a question that'll get you into trouble. Thank you for that complicated question. Look, I mean, this is crystal ball gazing, right? Obviously, my short answer is I don't know, but you've asked, so I can guess, because I think about that a lot, naturally. And when you read this book, you'll also think like that. I think on the whole, I think it would surprise him that we are having this conversation in Houston. Right? I think it would surprise him. I think it would further surprise him that his Hedgewarian mind has influenced 64 countries around the world, right? And it's increasingly influencing non-Indians. The Hedgewar influence is going beyond the realms of Indian, right? So I think these things would have surprised him. I think he would have been somewhat pleased that the Sangh has remained decentralized. That was his genius. If you want to think about organizational behavior, by the way, and organizational theory, someday somebody has to do a PhD on him and how he sets up the Sangh. Because I think it's so interesting and intelligent in the sense that it's a decentralized organization, right? I know popular media has you believe, right, that Mohanji Bhagwat sits on a chair and he presses some buttons and everybody else runs around doing what he wants. The reality just doesn't work like that. The Sangh is a highly decentralized movement, autonomous, independent, and so then it's fascinating how such an autonomous movement spreads around the world, yet remaining somewhat coherent in its mission, message, blah, 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 right? So this decentralized yet structured movement is his genius. So I think that would please him, right? That it's remained true to that. Same with his mission. I think the idea of, so his solution to this problem of lack of social capital was what he termed as Rashtra Bhav, right? Sadly, that term has been mistranslated into nationalism. He would have never meant it as nationalism. That's a misrendering of the word Rashtra Bhav, and I describe that in the book at great length. So I think that's intact. Other things he may be worried about. The wealth gap, the inequalities of India today may have concerned him, right? I think large swathes of the country still, on the whole, women are still not integrated into mainstream life and society. I think that would have concerned him. I think in certain pockets, especially in rural India, caste and that division, that fragmentation of jati, varna, whatever language you want to use, but that fundamental fossilization, I think he would still be concerned about these things. But then I suppose the Sangh would say the job is not finished, right? So, yeah, I hope that answers your question somewhat.
What's your plan to translate in different Indian languages?
If I tell you, will you still buy the book?
Which language you want?
So the Marathi version and the Hindi version and the Tamil version will come out in 2026 throughout the year. So I think Tamil is at the end of the year, Marathi, Hindi is coming out. The audiobook is available. And then I would like it, but of course, they won't listen to me until all of you buy the book. If you buy the book and Penguin makes some money, they have promised me that they will translate this book into Arabic, French, and German, which is important.
Sachin, I want to congratulate you first of all for writing this book, and I'm inspired to know you are a third generation in UK. What inspired you to write on this subject, and what is your mission? What are you trying to accomplish from this? And just if you could tell me a little bit more.
So I run a center. The International Center for Sustainability is designed to help policymakers in the US and in India, US and the UK to better understand India, right? So I'm on that journey myself. I want to understand the nuances of modern India. And it goes back to that same point I made at the beginning, that as I was going on this journey to understand modern India, because I think we have to get India right. India is too big, too significant to get wrong. So when you travel India, you just can't avoid the RSS. If you have your eyes open and you're a bit curious, you cannot avoid the RSS. But nobody knows anything meaningful about the RSS, right? Even RSS swayamsevaks don't know anything about Keshav Hedgewar, or nothing meaningful. As in, they know stories and whatever, but nothing in depth. So, how can that be? So that thirst for kind of like, how can that, I want to get to that's just my curiosity. And they say curiosity kills the cat. So, just curiosity. But my desire to understand modern India.
Thank you.
Sachin, thank you so much for being here. I got up and I heard you answer a previous question, but you talked about Hedgewarian thought and the idea that somebody who was influenced by the Gita and these Latin thinkers, and then you talk about what he finds surprising about us being here and talking about him. What are the limits to which that Hedgewarian thought is coherent, right? Like, this is an HSS-sponsored event, doing Sangh work in Houston. What level of what he was thinking about in Nagpur in 1925 makes sense for us? What's your take on it?
Super question. Really, really good question, right? I think about that quite a lot, actually. Here's my contention. You have to go on your own journey, but here's my contention. And if you don't mind, because you asked, I'm going to introduce two words. I've already introduced one phrase, Rashtrabhav, which is not nationalism. And the second word is Deshbhakti, which is not patriotism. Both things are very, very bad translations. Done by the British, adopted by Indian Western Academy, and adopted by the RSS. They are bad translations of the Hedgewarian intent, the Hedgewarian meaning. This is a man who read Voltaire, goodness sake. He could have used patriotism if he wanted to use patriotism, right? He could have used nationalism if he wanted to use nationalism. He doesn't. He uses specific. He's writing English, 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 but then when he gets to Rashtrabhav, he uses Rashtrabhav. Because he meant Rashtrabhav. He didn't mean nationalism. He didn't mean patriotism. These are bad renderings. Now, if you understand Rashtrabhav, which I'm not going to tell you, you have to read the book. I have to let you make sure you buy it, right? So if you grapple with that, that answers the relevance here. And I'll give you an example. I've traveled America extensively. From Britain to America is the other side of the pond, right? That's how we see it. And I see in America, which is in the midst of losing, or its social capital is evaporating. Americans are struggling to trust Americans. What does it mean to be American today? In a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic society, what binds Americans? Constitution? Not really. With the flag? Not really. What binds you to say, you are mine, I am yours, we have to live together, let's co-build a society? That's social capital. That social capital is evaporating. Well, surprise, surprise. Hedgewar was asking the exact same question 100 years ago about the Hindu society. Right? So maybe there's something to glean of our modern problems that Europe is facing, Britain is facing, America is facing, from the Hedgewarian mind. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect and everything is there, but what I'm saying is he offered a solution. He offered a way out of the fly bottle, right, as they say. So I think it is incredibly relevant and contemporary, right? If you can grapple with this notion of Deshbhakti and this notion of Rashtrabhav, if you get those two things right, then I think it's really relevant for this audience and your children's children, right? Who will most likely be here, we hope, in another 50 to 75 years. So I hope I've kind of answered the question without really answering it.
It is very good to see a lot of second generation kids are coming and asking the question. So yeah, next question from Shri.
Namaste ji. I just want to say that was my exact question, and so I stood here.
You can ask a different question also.
I stood here the whole time trying to think of something else to ask. But I think what I've been thinking about recently might not be directly related to Hedgewar or Maybe you have some opinions on what he might have said about this, but I've been thinking about how much our rituals and practices connect you to our Hindu roots. So as a Hindu American living here, I have to actively try to attend every festival, or I have to try to do arti every day. I have to, it's like not something that comes naturally, as in I've not grown up in that milieu where everybody's doing it around me. So everything that I do is an effort to connect with my roots. How much of that is, like, I think that has influenced my understanding of India and my understanding of my Hindu religion. But is that something that you need to have in your life, to understand, to like work with RSS and work in HSS and stuff? Because I can tell you from personal experience, my life in HSS has not involved rituals and traditions. It has involved actual action, right? But I want to know what Hedgewar might have said about the importance of these rituals when it comes to building social capital, like you might have said earlier.
Great. Only an American can off the fly ask a question like that. Thank you. Good question though. Look, I'm not going to postulate what Hedgewar would have thought or think, or that's not my role, right? Who am I to do that? But your point about, I was going to bring it to Hedgewar directly. For the Hedgewarian mind, belief is not the social glue that binds people. In fact, belief in the public space is divisive. Belief is a personal journey, personal thing, amongst individuals, families, small groups, worshippers of a certain denomination. Okay. But that's not going to be the glue that binds a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic America, never mind just Indian community, right? So that's why the Shaka is a space where you will notice, even after 100 years, there you will never find creed, religion, in that sense, the religiosity of it, right? You won't find 25, 30, or 50, or 100 deities in a Shaka. You'll find 0 deities. You'll only see the Dwaj, right? The saffron flag, the Bhagwa Dwaj, right? Which is the symbol of Dharma. That's it. You don't find anything else. So it's a space free of belief. Because belief is your prerogative, the individual, or the small collective. There is no caste. There is no class. So in the Shaka is a safe space where your wealth doesn't matter. Your wealth is neutralized. Right? And it should be a space where your jati or where you come from in India, none of that matters. What language you speak doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter from the Hedgewarian perspective. So it's a safe space for you to be you, for you to discover who you are, my neighbor to discover who he is. And in that journey, in that bonding time, through gamification, through exercise, you build social capital. You learn to cooperate, you learn to trust each other. It's a psychological state of mind. Only then does seva kick in, the idea of service. Service to what? Service to your local community. Not service 5,000 miles away. Service to your local community. Right? Where you are building your roots and your social capital. So, all I will say is that this makes the Hedgewarian mind incredibly beautiful. So while rooted in Hindu Dharma, he gives a solution to a diverse society of how to still find oneness in that diversity. Right? So if you go down on the route of belief, therefore rituals, right? No matter how pure, no matter how beautiful you might think they are, but a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-religious society cannot all agree to a set of rituals. Not possible. Never has been, never will be. So therefore, to bond a society, you've got to go beyond belief. Right? So that's not to say belief is bad or religion is nothing like that. I'm saying from the Hedgewarian perspective, how he constructed the Shaka to build this social capital was on those grounds.
Thank you.
Jawaharlal Nehru's father comes to him and says, hey, basically offers him a seat at the table. And he turns it away. In the moment where he discovers that actually politics is not the solution for this country, right? Because there is no social capital, there is no Rashtra Bhav, right? So he gives up that opportunity, and then he starts his experiment that later becomes the RSS. So he moves away from what I call anarchy and radical revolutionary to political nationalism, and he transforms himself into cultural nationalism. Now, cultural nationalism is a very specific word. You can't just be vague about it. I describe it at length, what that means. But once you understand cultural nationalism, it is something very, very different to political nationalism. Very quickly, I'll just explain it. Political nationalism is where basically you believe that you have to capture the state through democratic means or through military means, whatever means, capture the state, engineer the society. Subhash Chandra Bose, Savarkar, Nehru, Gandhi, all of these places, Ambedkar, all these people were political nationalists. They felt you had to capture the state, change the society. Keshav Hedgewar seems to be the only one who I can think of, along with Aurobindo Ghosh to some degree, who basically says, nah, the Rajya is never going to solve this problem. You have to first build the Rashtra. Only when you build the Rashtra will then a strong population with high social capital be able to discipline the Rajya. Otherwise, your society will always remain broken. Right? So this is the transition he goes through.
Yeah, now you can ask.
Okay, this is Arvind Khanna. I think everyone can hear me.
Yes.
From Delhi. And I used to go to Shakha a lot since my birth, because my father was very much involved in Shakha. I was just listening. You were saying that Dr. Hedgewar was a very complicated, complex person. While in Shakha, we always studied he was a very simple person. Never had been a very complicated person. Otherwise, it is my belief, I also had been studying a lot, that if something like RSS had been a complicated organization, then it would have not survived for 100 years. It is a very simple organization. As you yourself told, that the Guru is just the Bhagavad Gita. No one person is Guru. Only Bhagavad Gita is the Guru. This is my first question, that I think he was a simple person, but as per your opinion, he was a complicated person. My second question is, you are saying that Hindus are divided into castes.
That's a fact of all organizations. Right? That's not a unique thing. So when somebody within the Sangh is talking about Keshav Hedgewar, of course they are simplifying it to a two-dimensional, one-dimensional character, because they are within the organization, within the movement. A lot of things are picked up by being in the movement. This is a book that is written for the non-Hindu, the non-Indian, the person who can't even pronounce Hedgewar, right? It's written for people who are out of the organization, as much as it is for in the organization. And the other thing is, this is a scholarly work. Scholarly work in the sense of no human being, I would contest, is simple. I don't think any of you are simple, right? And I certainly don't think a man of his genius is simple, right? Therefore, I believe that it is time that he deserves to be studied with all the subtleties and the nuances that he deserves, right? So I think when I say complexity, I don't mean it as a pejorative. I mean it as the most deepest compliment, right? So it's time that we not simplify him. I say it's time we look at him as he really was, right? And get into the details of what really made him shape modern India 100 years later, right? So that's my only contention.
We've grown up believing that Hedgewar was, next to a god, and the idea that he himself thought that Hindus were the reason why India is backward, I can't get my mind around that. We've grown used to believing that Indian society 3,000 years ago was some kind of idyllic paradise, and then the Mughals came and the Christians came and they ruined everything. So what happened? I mean, what made Hedgewar draw this conclusion?
Yeah, thank you. So let me just clarify, right? Let me just clarify what I said. Because that could get me into a lot of trouble, right? Let me just clarify what I said. In 1925, not 2,000 years ago, in 1925, Keshav Hedgewar saw his India, and I described it at some length, that's how he would have seen it. And you would have agreed with him that the problem with India, the British, the Mughal imperialism, I said these things, right? And all of the others, the French, the Portuguese, you name it, are all the symptoms of a much deeper problem. History tells us that any global superpower, and in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century CE, and 7th, 8th, 9th century CE, yes, the thing that we call Bharat, or the wider, greater India, was a global superpower at that time. A superpower only collapses not from without, it collapses from within. History tells you that. Whether you're the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Syrians, it doesn't matter. Every great civilization collapses from internal decay. And then the external people come along and take advantage of your decay. And that's what happens. And you just have to know history to know that. And he knows history, right? And so his point is let's stop blaming everybody else, right? Let's look inwards and let's really rethink about how we organize our society, right? Which I think is a perfectly rational, reasonable thing to ask. So by all means, let me just clarify for the audience so nobody leaves with a misunderstanding. I'm not suggesting, nor do I believe, but nor am I suggesting that Keshav Hedgewar thought Hindus are the problem for India, period. I'm just saying that somewhere along the lines, the thing that bound a society together had evaporated, and the society had fragmented. And in a fragmented society, you start getting these internal weaknesses, internal problems, which then outside forces take advantage of. That's all I'm saying. So I will end it with that.